Hey everyone, it's ENDYMION. I've been doing a lot of Ubisoft stuff lately, but I wanted to take a break for a second here and shift the focus away for this video because there's some things we really got to talk about and I'm not seeing nearly enough people knowing about this. So in this video, we're talking how Henry Cavill's Warhammer series might actually be dead officially. Space Marine 2's chief officer blasting the game's industry for being overzealous morons, and we gotta finish with that new branding of Halo, cause there's a lot to say there too. Firstly, Henry Cavill and Warhammer 40K. As you likely know already, late last year, Games Workshop announced that they were officially partnering with Amazon to work on a Warhammer 40K live-action universe. Akin to their Rings of Power series, I know not the best comparison, probably made a few of you cringe at the idea of Warhammer getting that same treatment, but it's the reality sadly. Obviously, this project or projects would be massively expensive considering Warhammer tends to star people like Space Marines that are obviously way taller than your average human beings, and the monsters are disgusting freaks that will likely cost millions in dollars in CGI to produce. Well, now it may just possibly be all dead. From that Park Place rumor, Games Workshop and Amazon entirely content to let Henry Cavill's Warhammer 40K live-action project die. The information here comes from a friend of the channel called the Archcast, and based on what he's been saying, the dream may just be dead, fellas. Pour a bit out for Warhammer, hug your bros, and scream at the sun. It's probably not going to happen. Arch explains that the agreement between Games Workshop and Amazon has pretty much not been going as well as we would hope it would. Arch said that back in June 2024 that around this time Amazon and Games Workshop were entering what was considered a pivotal moment for the series. They were pretty much at the halfway point of their contract and things hadn't been going smoothly and nothing had really been done with the property so far. The three possibilities at that point in time was either there would be a script and or idea ready that would get greenlit and then gain momentum. The second possibility was that the entire project would be shelved until later when someone with a functioning brain could actually think of something to do with it. And finally, the third option was that the project would just simply die and we'd never see a live-action Warhammer show from Amazon. In my opinion, as much as I would like to see a live-action Warhammer show, I personally believe it would be simply far too expensive to do in a manner that would be satisfactory for fans of the franchise. I think the best course of action, maybe I'm wrong, let me know, would be that Warhammer takes the animated route instead. Sort of like how Invincible was adapted on Amazon as an animated TV show over live action. Even though apparently they still want to do a live action movie of Invincible 2 eventually, which seems pointless, but alright I guess. I do think if Warhammer got the Clone Wars TV show treatment and they told stories that way, it would be much more manageable and far less cheaper to do as well. Obviously, they could reuse enemy models aplenty and you would skirt your way around depicting your characters in terms of their believability in size. If they just made the series look like the Space Marine 2 CGI trailers, it would still be expensive to do, I understand that, but likely still cheaper than doing it live action. I mean, the massive scope of Warhammer's worlds alone would be ludicrous in terms of the cost when it comes to depicting them properly. Henry Cavill could still be in the series that they make, voicing a character, and maybe even they could do his likeness in the show as well. But I do personally think that a live-action version would not work just because it would cost way too much money to do. And when it comes to live action, as you know, they always cut corners when they can. It's usually why whenever you watch a new TV show, that the first episode is amazing and full of production value, but then episodes 2 or 3 suddenly aren't as bombastic or quality driven. This is because, in case you don't know, the most expensive episodes usually of a live action series are the first and last episodes of a season, and the rest of the episodes have varying budgets depending, of course. I don't know, but if you ask me, would I rather have a 1-hour Warhammer live-action episode with a $100 million budget, or an entire animated series that costed but a fraction of that 1-hour live-action version? Maybe I'm wrong and they can do this justice, but this is Amazon we're talking about. Rings of Power alone kinda tells you that they already can't get what should be simple right to begin with. Arch also had a lot more to say on this recently, so he said, and I quote, "It has been complete radio silence on the matter of the TV show ever since we had the last update the last time around. It appears as if both Amazon and Games Workshop are entirely content to just let the project die. Even with a 1-month extension into January, nothing seems to have been produced, still no money is allocated, still no accounts have been created. Still no contracts have been signed. Henry Cavill's influence is likely extraordinarily limited, if he has any influence in the matter at all at this moment. He doesn't have an employment contract with Amazon or Games Workshop, merely the promise that if the product ever actually goes through, he will have a role in it. Both sides have concessions. The female custodies thing, for example, was almost guaranteed in my opinion, a move on behalf of Games Workshop to placate Amazon or demonstrate to them what would happen if they were to push for female Space Marines. Massive outcry that is, and to hammer it home to them that yeah, this is not going to be a very good idea. Meanwhile, of course, Amazon has their diversity quotas and they also want the Space Marines. They're not really interested in an Imperial Guard show, I'd reckon, because they're not the poster child, even if an Imperial Guard show would be, well, 1, cheaper and 2, more easily relatable. They did give Games Workshop the account access, for example, to flag various items on Amazon's websites to take down things that Games Workshop were of the opinion were in violation of their trademark. It may be that Games Workshop got a little bit uppity and decided to demand that their own authors be allowed to create the screenplay. Again, the Black Library authors are excellent book writers, but they have no business writing screenplays, and Amazon probably knows that. And Amazon probably knows it can't really afford another big flop here. Right now, I would say that the probability leans more towards the entire thing being dead than it ever being greenlit." End quote. Isn't it incredible how inept things really are when you expose those said things behind the scenes? It's just like Ubisoft and all that crap I've been exposing lately as well. It's sobering to realize that a lot of these companies, they're kind of just full of people who have no idea what they have in front of them, usually all of the time. Getting the Black Library writers would be a good idea in my opinion. Honestly, anyone that actually knows the lore of these stories and worlds would be better than what we have right now. And I'm amazed that it's not being looked at in this way, but to allow the whole thing to fall through your hands like this, it's kind of pathetic. Amazon is being handed what is basically the next potential MCU or Star Wars-esque property to their front door. Games Workshop has bought the cake, the balloons, they even hired an old guy with an accordion to sing as the party begins. And these morons are looking at everything and going, well, this is nice, but where are all the diverse women of color and the checklist that we want to do? I think it's in Games Workshop's best interest to just wash their hands of Amazon's doo-doo stains and then just move on to somewhere else. Forget live action entirely in my opinion, unless they have the money to put Avengers Endgame levels of budget into it, which, let's be real, they probably don't, and then turn the whole thing animated, which then opens up your possibilities tenfold and reduces your budget as well. Make it violent, gritty, and the universe is yours for the taking. Maybe Netflix could do this for them, but Netflix also tends to do a lot of DEI nonsense as well, so who knows. But allowing Henry Cavill and the Warhammer IP to languish like a whale on a beach, knowing full well what's possible, if you just gave this project a little push, is kind of insane to me, but after seeing what Amazon did with Rings of Power, maybe this is just for the best. Because if this did go forward, you'd absolutely have female Space Marines, and if that were to happen, I'm becoming the Joker in real time, and so are all of you. Speaking of Space Marines, that series has been going really well, hasn't it? After breaking 2 million in sales, Saber Interactive, the makers of Space Marine 2, have been celebrating seeing their game do so well right out of the gate. They also recently spoke to IGN and threw some much needed shade in the faces of the game industry, which was glorious to see. From IGN, this article is titled, "Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 dev says big budget games are failing, in part because teams are overscoping their projects." Saber's chief creative officer Tim Willits was interviewed and pretty much said that modern gaming is not dying, and that a lot of developers are just completely out of touch with what players actually want these days. IGN brings up games that have failed such as Concord or Suicide Squad, wondering why did these games fail when others like Space Marine 2 are winning. Tim Willits claims it's cause not only are these publishers and dev studios making things that nobody really wants to play, but they're also making things that don't actually do anything remotely interesting either. The idea here is that the games mentioned like Concord and such, they don't do any one thing particularly well. Instead, they're simply games that do multiple things fine or less than average, and then that leads to a product that many have no interest in playing or buying. It's sort of like Sekiro, for example. That's a game I would consider to be incredible and borderline perfect in what it's trying to do because it erases all the fluff surrounding it. You don't have multiple melee weapons besides what your shinobi arm can do, I guess, but your main weapon is your katana, and that's it. But because of that, From Software was able to hone the experience and make the game focus entirely on its core concepts, which is melee combat, parrying, and the agility of your character. Didn't need 20 different weapon types, a relationship companion system, or a battle pass. And this is the kind of game that I would also compare Space Marine to in my opinion. Here's what Tim Willett had to say to IGN, and I quote, "It is not necessarily the genre that has moved on because great games will always do well. One of the things we try to do at Saber, and this is part of my job as creative officer of all the teams, we have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons and that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction in the gameplay and the feeling you have. And then we adhere to our core pillars, like to be the ultimate Space Marine, melee, range, swarms, that's it. And a lot of teams throughout development will overscope games. They look at some other game that just came out and say, oh, we got to do that, let's add this, we got to do this. And then they lose focus on the core, what actually makes the game fun. We are not in Space Marine 2 doing things like that. Well, the swarms are new technology, but there isn't some revolutionary new gameplay mechanic that no one's ever seen before. There are gameplay mechanics that people are familiar with, and we do it really, really well, and we execute it really, really well. We don't need to sell 4 million units to make it, Space Marine 2, a success. There are many games, sadly, especially out of North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you are a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million? There are examples like that, and we do not want to be in that business. We want to be a developer that focuses on the core experience. What makes the games actually fun, and then do it really well, and then make it affordably. Look at SnowRunner. Dude, SnowRunner is literally driving trucks through mud. That's it, I'm done, I just described the game. 15 million people played it because the experience is perfect. Look at World War Z, like come on, we're not going to get an Academy Award for that game? But 25 million people have played it because it's just this perfectiveness, and that's what we do well, end quote. I agree with Tim here because he's right, the ambition and the trend chasing of current modern gaming, especially in the West, is leading to an eventual gaming crash for that entire side of the industry. And yet the eastern side of game development in places like Japan or Korea, they're just thriving like crazy. Look at Ryu Studio, the makers of Like a Dragon, or Yakuza as you may remember it being called originally. They seem to release a new game every single year in some form. This is completely unheard of when it comes to Western studios outside of maybe Call of Duty or a sports game. But in COD's case, the yearly release schedule is only doable because each release has a rotation of about 3 core development studios plus all of the support studios that help as well. So when one Call of Duty game releases, the next 2 CODs are well into development already. This is why the development time between games is so consistent. Ryu Studios proves with games such as Like a Dragon that you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel every time you make a new game. You can even reuse entire environments that you used prior in other games. What matters is more so how the area is being used, and what content exists within as opposed to what the environment itself is. A big room in a video game can be anything. It could be a boss battle, it could be a horror experience, or a stealth mission level. The size of the room isn't really important, but what you're doing in that room is what really matters. Space Marine 2 is that to a T, as is Sekiro, as well as Like a Dragon. Unfortunately, for a lot of these misfires, they don't seem to focus on the moment-to-moment gameplay. They instead focus on identity or ideology. And then they kind of just hope that that's enough to coat any criticisms like Suicide Squad or Dustborn has been given. In Ubisoft's case, their games have become so homogenized, there's barely any difference between them. I mean, Watch Dogs just uses the Ghost Recon third-person shooter skeleton in a city environment limited movement like a nerfed Assassin's Creed game. So it's no wonder that Ubisoft, as I've been cataloging lately, has been doing so poorly. Tim Willits of Saber is directly taking shots at places like Ubisoft or even Square Enix with his comments, and I really don't blame him. Remember that Final Fantasy 16 and 7 Rebirth underperformed because Square likely thought that these games would do Grand Theft Auto numbers. But the reality is that it's as Willits said, what business are these people in if you don't sell 5 million plus copies, you're just considered a failure. The only way your game is a failure if it doesn't sell that much is simply because the product you made is completely out of whack budgetary wise. One of my favorite games I played last year was Like a Dragon Gaiden. It was cheaper to buy than most games at release, it was also shorter, and it reused concepts from previous Like a Dragon games, but the overall package had plenty of variety and fun to be had. To me, that game was far more fun and compelling than something that takes 10 years to make. And I'm already playing another Like a Dragon game right now, actually with Infinite Wealth, that also came out this year. I think in Rio Studios' case at least, they are masters at reusing content and instead injecting fun ideas with interesting gameplay loops in a way that places like Ubisoft wish they could do but really can't. Space Marine 2 is excellent because it doesn't try to be 6 different game genres at once all the time like some Ubisoft product. It's a game where you kill aliens with your melee weapons, or you shoot them in the face and then sometimes you tear them in half, or you even, I don't know, headbutt them to death with your literal skull. Things don't really need to be complicated, and it's a big reason why the industry on the Western front is crashing the way that it is. Then you have other game developers where every game has to be franchise potential. Each game needs to be open world, have a cash shop, and offer plenty of recycled mission structure in order to artificially inflate the world with content. But there comes a point where you hoard so much of the same thing that your entire ship just capsizes from sheer bloat alone. I wish more games threw away this AAA bloat and focused more primarily on the quality of the content over the quantity instead. Sekiro and Space Marine 2 are not long games, and I love that they aren't like that. I don't really need Space Marine to have a 40-hour campaign. What that game really needs, however, is a horde mode, so I can just rip and tear to my heart's content. But the way AAA is going, unless your game is a massive open-world third-person shooter with tacked-on RPG mechanics, with some kind of leveling up or upgrades, but also has a cash shop, some form of vehicle that you can operate, but also a melee combat system. But the melee isn't great because there's not enough resources or time to adequately focus in on that part of the gameplay because we're too busy checking off every other list in existence. Can't forget we also need some sort of minigame that is surface level and a full campaign mode, but it would take too long to actually make real levels, so we'll just reuse the same mission structure as our side content, which is just repeats of what the player has already been doing, then we may have a game. And you can't forget the added sprinkle of activism, a little bit of that localization from the West, and a nice slice of diversity on this crap pie to finish it off. And I literally just described to you every single game made by Ubisoft in the last 15 years outside of maybe Immortals Phoenix Rising and Prince of Persia Lost Crown just now. Look at what's coming out this week as of the making of this video. You got Silent Hill 2 Remake, Metaphor ReFantazio, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. 3 games all being celebrated for various reasons, and 3 games that all scored very well in terms of their Metacritics. And what else do they all have in common? Alright, they weren't made in the West. The only input these games had from the West were either dubs or localization problems. Which, funnily enough, the localization things always seem to be an issue when it comes to games from the West. But all of these problems are, like I said, not from the East, but always made from people from the West, you know, getting their little fingers into these games. Outside of Space Marine 2 and Helldivers 2, the majority of Western stuff has failed this year. Star Wars Outlaws costed $300 million somehow. Concord was $400 million. Dustborn, I'll have more on that, but that game costed way more than you actually think it did. You got Zao, remember Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn? Does anyone even remember that game at all at this point? And how can we forget that we also have Unknown 9 Awakening coming this month as well, which is another Sweet Baby game, which allegedly has very poor pre-order sales and will likely not sell well at all. How many times do things need to fail before these publishers and studios realize that what they're selling is not working? Space Marine 2 should not be a rare Western win, yet sadly that's exactly what it has become. An anomaly in a sea of crap. Just go look at Halo right now. 343 Industries has rebranded themselves to Halo Studios, as if that changes anything. It also doesn't help that their chief of staff, which means they are obviously in charge of who gets hired, is a woman who is so pro-diversity and DEI, it's comical at this point. Don't harass this person, but let's look at this stuff. Melissa Boone, which has all the usual bells and whistles in their profile, is telling you that this is going to be likely ass, has also been revealed to refer to Latino people as Latinx as well. Great. She also apparently lives in Seattle, so she's surrounded by the usual woke people, and she has experience in researching and pushing diversity, equity, and accessibility in gaming. I'm not lying, by the way, it actually says that in her own bio that she probably wrote herself. She also focuses in on African Americans, Latinx or Latinx, however you say it, and LGBTQ+ folks. Yeah, if you ask me, doesn't seem like anything is changing over at 343 Industries, guys. I mean, sorry, Halo Studios now. That is a franchise that has been cooked from the inside out by activism and in-app developers for around a decade now. Why would them changing their name mean anything? It doesn't. At least apparently they're moving to Unreal Engine, and that's sparking rumors that they will more easily allow the Halo games to come to places like PlayStation. But besides that, what else do we have? If the same people are working on Halo that gave you not one, but multiple milquetoast experiences, why would you believe that any of this would lead to better games in the future? I mean, my god, they couldn't even properly port older Halo games to modern consoles. They didn't even make those games. They just had to port them, and they couldn't even do that. I guess we'll see in time, but if you ask me, I have zero hope for Halo. I gave up on this series after Reach came out. Pretty much once the OG Bungie people left it behind, I knew it was over and done with, and it was time to move on. At least you have Space Marine, which is fun, and by the way, Saber actually worked on the original Halo games, which doesn't surprise me considering how fun Space Marine 2 is. And also before I go, I want to tell you that I was told by a source that Saber, which makes Space Marine 2, is full to the brim with base developers. Those guys do not agree with the way games are being made today at all. They think that the rest of the industry is full of insane people, and I mean, look at how they reacted when Saber's CEO said the games shouldn't push ideology or agendas. These same freaks that are all kumbaya, they went haywire and they wanted his blood as sacrifice for opening his mouth. So from Warhammer's live-action future likely being dead in the water like a body floating in a lake, and Saber sticking a middle finger to the industry, and telling everyone from the likes of Ubisoft and more that it's not gamers' fault but their own, and Halo just being garbage with a new name, man, it's all so tiresome. It's like I said in my previous videos where I talked to sources at Ubisoft, a lot of game companies are going to start marketing their games towards you as being more akin to how you remember gaming to be. However, behind the scenes, these studios actually will have zero changes happening at all. They're just going to sell you the same product they were going to sell you already with all the buzzwords and talking points they wanted, but they will just trick you into buying it as you think you'll be getting another good old-fashioned game. I genuinely would not be surprised if Master Chief is promoted in the next Halo as the main character, but secretly they have an entirely different protagonist in question to take over that they know the fan base will not like. But they really want to push it so badly they'll woo you into thinking this is Halo making its comeback when it's actually going to be not doing that at all. 343 Industries isn't dead, they're just rebranding themselves. The same way instead of woke, they're just using terms like bridge now. It's like a jaded relationship and the abuser lies to you saying that they're gonna change, but in reality, all they did was get a haircut or put on a new t-shirt. It's the same person, no matter how you slice it, and they're likely hoping that we're all dumb enough to fall for it again. Do I hope Halo returns to prominence? Of course I do. But my cynical brain is telling me it needs to be made by anyone other than 343, or I'm sorry, Halo Studios, whatever they're called, who cares, based on their horrific track record. Remember when they said Halo Infinite would be supported for years to come and they're already moving on? You really think I'm gonna believe them this time? Yeah, I'll believe it when I actually see proof, but until then, just enjoy good games, support what you like, and at least we have some good developers out here in the West. Sadly, they're not the majority right now, but over time, hopefully we can change this. Thank you for watching, subscribe, thanks to my supporters, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.